Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Welcome back to episode 5 of the OT is In podcast. One of the common occupations for kids, or important ways that our kids occupy their time, is handwriting. When learning this skill becomes difficult or it isn't coming easy, we have to play detective to figure out why. And sometimes vision is a piece of that puzzle. Dr. Christine Kalicki, a great friend and coworker of mine here in Pennsylvania, is a dedicated developmental optometrist who's made it her mission to go beyond the traditional bounds of her field. She dives deep into the visual needs of children and adults, and she's here to answer some of those questions for us. In this episode, she sheds light on the lesser-known aspects of vision assessments for children. She talks about eye movements, defines convergence, accommodation, and depth perception, which are often overlooked in routine eye exams. She provides us with practical insights, personal experiences, and valuable resources that are going to help parents and caregivers identify symptoms related to visual challenges and to seek the appropriate professional assistance. She also shares her expertise on the impact of vision on athletic performance and even driving anxiety in older teens. So join us for an engaging conversation that delves into the integral role of vision in various aspects of daily life, especially handwriting, and discover valuable resources for seeking support in understanding and addressing of visual challenges. Before we continue, I want to take a second to invite you to the Handwriting Focus Group. In episodes 5 through 8 of the OT is In podcast, we're discussing handwriting, but you'll notice it is only one aspect of handwriting: vision. The month-long focus group is a deep dive into the complex task of handwriting. Led by me, Sarah Collins, a seasoned homeschool mom and occupational therapist who understands your challenges firsthand. Join us as we tackle the tough questions. What are all the skills needed to write a simple sentence? How and why do the required skills get more complex as expectations grow? What is dysgraphia and how do you address it? When is it time to embrace technology over traditional handwriting methods? And most importantly, do we really need to write in the digital age? So you'll see there are so many more questions that we can target through that group than here on this one podcast. Restore hope and confidence in your homeschooling journey. Sign up now and let's revolutionize your approach to handwriting together. You can find the group in the shop at homeschoolot.com or specifically homeschoolot.com/shop/handwriting-focus-group. Now back to the show. Okay, so hello and welcome back to the Occupational Therapy, the OT is In podcast. And here I am with my good friend, Christine Kalicki. We work together at least every other month. I run a primitive reflex clinic in her clinic. You allow me to be a big piece of that. And I love it. I'm so grateful for it. But I wanted to say there are so many questions that come to me as an OT that are things like, wait, my child is really struggling with reading, or my child is struggling with handwriting. And when I ask, well, have you had their vision checked? Someone might say, yeah, it's 2020, or they wear glasses already, and it's clearly not that. And it always makes me say, but there's more. So, Dr. Kalicki, can you start by telling us first, like, what is the more? What are you looking at when you're assessing someone's eyes and their brain? Tell me all about it.
So I guess that goes back to the question of what is part of a routine exam. And a routine exam, the majority of people who do routine exams, they'll check acuity. And acuity means when I show you a letter that's at a simulated 20-foot distance, how clearly can you see it? And they'll check for the ocular health to make sure that everything is healthy. And those are wonderful things to check, and they're really important to check. But if our kids were looking at 20 feet all day, they would be fine. But that's not what they're doing. So, what kids need is not just, am I 20/20 and are my eyes healthy, but they need to have other skills looked at also. So, what should be part of routine exam? For kids, you really want to make sure that someone is checking how their eyes move. So, you need the ocular motility checked. And for that, there's different skills with that. And I'll run through each one if that's okay.
I love that.
First is pursuit. So imagine you have a kid watching a bird fly across the sky. Their eyes should be able to follow that bird smoothly and make a nice smooth movement. That's pursuits. Now the
Okay.
kid's reading, and as they're reading across word by word by word, those jumps are saccades, and those are important to be accurate. Kids also need to have really good convergence. So if they're looking at something really close, you want to make sure they could turn their eyes in and keep both eyes aimed at that. That's convergence. They also need good accommodative skills. And accommodation is focusing, and not the focusing where you think, pay attention, but focusing, can you look at this print? Can you make it clear? And can you maintain that clarity? They also need to have good depth perception as well. So, unfortunately, those are not mandated to be part of an exam, but for kids who spend the majority of their day up close doing things, and even if they're looking farther away, those are really important skills that they need to have to be able to perform well.
So, how would we know whether, I mean, sure, it would be great if every, eye doctor that we go to does that, but how do we know as parents to say, wait, I think something might need to be further assessed here?
One of the things that would be important to do is when you call to make the appointment, ask them, will you be checking the eye movement? Will you check my child's eye alignment? Because a kid who has a tendency for one eye to want to drift out is
Mm.
going to struggle more. Will you be checking their focusing system to see how well they can focus? Will you be checking depth perception? And make sure that the location that you're going to is used to dealing with kids and is used to checking for those skills. And you also should ask, so if you check those things and you find any of them are a problem, what would you do next? Because
Love
they
that.
should have someone that they would refer to who can then specialize and look into it in more depth or detail.
So that's actually a perfect kind of lead in because people will ask me, well, do I see the ophthalmologist, the optometrist, the neuro-ophthalmologist? Like, what is the difference between all of those and how do you know kind of where to go and where to start?
So I'm an optometrist. My degree is OD, which is Doctor of Optometry. And optometry degrees, we spend 4 years learning about the visual system, learning optics, learning about health of the eyes, the different systemic condition that can affect the health of the eyes. Optometrists tend to be more primary care oriented, meaning if you need a general exam, if you need to get a glasses prescription, if you need to update your contacts, if you have pink eye, those are the sort of things that are considered primary care. There are optometrists who specialize. You can find optometrists who, some of them will specialize in a certain medical condition. Some will do glaucoma, some will do dry eye, some will do myopia management to slow down the progression of nearsightedness. My specialty, I'm a developmental optometrist. My specialty is visual therapy. So I work with kids and adults and I help them improve their visual skills to give them better quality of life, better performance in academic, in athletics, and even in just navigating the world, basically. So optometry would be the primary care. Ophthalmologist will either be an MD or a DO. An MD is a medical doctor. A DO is a doctor of osteopathic medicine. And they spend the first 4 years of their education learning about the body. They work systemically. Once they're done and they get their degree and they move on, during the residency is when they specialize. So if someone's going to be an ophthalmologist, they would learn that during their residency. And same thing, neuro-ophthalmologist, then they would go on even farther to learn not just ophthalmology, learn the neuro-ophthalmology, which is a lot more detailed and intense. So when you're going to look for who you should go see, You wouldn't just go to a neuro-ophthalmologist unless there's a possible neurological problem. So if someone has, say, MS, and they're
Hmm.
concerned that it might have visual effects from it, you can go see a neuro-ophthalmologist at that point. To go see, who should you go see first? Primary care would be optometry. If there's a
Okay.
problem, if you need to go see a specialist, if optometry finds like, yes, a neuro-ophthalmologist would be helpful, we can refer. If we find there's a health problem, you need to go see a retinal specialist, we would refer to that. So
Okay.
the gatekeepers, the primary care tends to be optometry, and then the specialists are the ophthalmologists.
Okay. All right. So when a person first comes to me, because as an occupational therapist, I look all about function. And that's what I love about what you do too, because you're really paying attention to, can you actually do the things that you need and want to do using your visual system, right? So what are some things that you do in your office? Like if someone does come to you after sure, you have that initial assessment, and then after that, what are some things that you do that you can help to work on these functional skills?
Oh, So I have a document, and I've been to multiple classes, worked with multiple really wonderful, incredibly intelligent people who do visual therapy. I have a document that's about 100 pages long with different exercises that I use.
Well, why don't you
Um,
just pull it out and start reading it? It'll be very invigorating and interesting.
I mean, one of the, and I give this to almost everybody. It's just learning eye-hand coordination, learning to do
Mm,
pursuits. I'll give a kid a beanbag and I'll say, pretend you're doing a throw and just make the movement of a throw, but nice and slow, and follow it with your eyes. And that way, having the beanbag in their hand gives them tactile feedback. And a kid who has a hard time watching it, I'll just tell them, squeeze that bag. You squeeze it and you'll have better fixation. Or if they're the parents there, I'll say, you keep tapping that beanbag to give them
yeah.
the tactile stimulation to keep their eyes there. So that's one
Ooh.
of the very,
I
very
mean,
early.
pulling all these senses together, you're speaking to my OT heart right here.
You know what? I've learned from the greats, and I've learned along the way what works. So
Yeah.
you learn, the more you do, you really learn. So that is one of the very first things I give kids. Plus, they like playing with the bean bags, and I'll say,
Yeah.
after you do it my way, play catch with it, do whatever you want. And then they're
Right.
still working more of that eye-hand coordination
Yeah.
and getting more skills, but on their terms. So that would
Yeah.
be one of the very first things I do, because I really want to work smooth eye movements, nice and slow, and get that eye-hand coordination down where I want it to be.
Mhm. So when we first started vision therapy was after my son, someone threw a frisbee to him and it came and clocked him right, right in the nose because he didn't have that convergence, right? He couldn't follow it in with his eyes. So, and we've mentioned that, but why would that specific skill, like, why does that matter, the convergence?
So convergence matters because when your eyes turn and aim, your brain knows where something is based on the angle. So if you're having trouble tracking, and a lot of kids have inaccurate convergence where they can kind of keep it single, it's not double, it's kind of
Mhm.
single. But if you assume that the ball is here when it's actually here, you're
Right.
not going to react to it properly. So accurate convergence is really important, because accurate convergence means accurate depth perception, and that's what helps you react appropriately.
So the reaction time. I love it. Now, what about so we've talked some about reading. Now I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here because well, we didn't talk about this one before, sorry. But so there's many times where families will say my kid can't pay attention, or they're wiggling so much in their seat, or they're getting up every 5 seconds every time that I ask them to, write a sentence or whatever. And again, that often triggers me to say, have you had their vision checked? Why? Why do those two things go hand in hand?
So let's go back to the convergence you just mentioned. When you're working up close, and kids have a shorter working distance than adults, so they're usually maybe 16 inches or so away, you have to converge for that 16-inch distance and maintain convergence for that
Mm,
16-inch distance. For a kid who has a hard time maintaining that, they're going
mhm,
to get headaches. They might, and some kids complain about it, some kids don't. The words might swim and move. They might notice that it turns double, or they might just feel uncomfortable and avoid it. And what I do when I have a kid who has convergence difficulty, what I love to do is pick up a prism, and prism can make your eyes have to move. So if I put a prism in that makes you have to converge more than usual, and I show that to a parent and I'll say, can you see that? Yeah, I can see it. How
Hmm.
comfortable is it? Oh, I don't like that at all. That's really
Mm.
uncomfortable. Now would you sit and do your homework? Oh, no, I
Oh,
wouldn't like that. I go, but you have work to do, so sit and pay attention and finish it. And
yeah,
that's when the light bulb goes off because then they can it's not a perfect,
right.
um, not a perfect simulation of what their kid's going through, but it gives them a glimpse into their child's life
Mm,
and the
right.
discomfort they're dealing with. Typically, if a kid has problems with convergence, a lot of those kids, if they get headaches, they're going to get headaches right along their temples.
So that might be one thing that they're saying. Why do you think that their child wouldn't say, like, so let's say that they're not getting headaches or they're not saying, like, how would we know that it could be something visual? And why wouldn't our child say that? Like, for example, my
So,
kid didn't, right?
so we've had kids who came in before, and as I'm doing tests, I see a pretty significant eye turn, and I'll ask them, like, when you read, do you ever see the words or the picture go from one and turn into two? And they'll say, oh, yeah, that happens all the time.
Mm.
And the parents will say, why didn't you say something? And the kid will go, you never asked me. It's really how a kid sees is how they
Mhm.
think everybody sees. They
Everybody
have
sees.
no frame of reference for normal. So I would say if you're not sure, get those skills checked out. If
Yeah.
all of those skills check out and are fine, then you've at least ruled out the visual component.
Mm.
If you don't get it ruled out, don't count on the child to tell you, I've noticed when I sit and read, the words tend to come in and out of focus.
Especially using that language. Excuse me,
And
mom.
I mean, for example, myself, the reason I do what I do is I have horrible depth perception. I couldn't catch a ball in gym class to save my life.
Mhm.
And I love to read though, so I would read like this. And I just, put my head down and read. As a child, I always assumed that, well, yeah,
That's
when
what
it turns
you
into
do.
two, you just get rid of one. And that was my solution. Nobody ever asked me if I was
Mhm.
having a problem. And I went through my entire childhood like that.
Mhm. Mhm. Because
So,
you
so yeah,
don't.
don't expect a
Yeah.
kid to tell you that.
Right. I love the way that you said, what the way that they see is how they expect everybody else to see. Because how would you know that it's not the what everyone else is doing or how people can perceive the world if you've only done it one way? There's not
Exactly.
you don't have another comparison. My son ended up saying, how are you supposed to read when the letters are moving on the page? And I was like,
Yeah.
they're not. But he
But
did
he at
finally,
least
ask the
he had
question.
vocabulary and the
Yeah.
insight to tell you that.
Mhm,
A lot of
mhm.
kids will just say, "I just don't like reading."
Yeah, yeah, totally. So, what are some other things as far as handwriting or other aspects of the day that kind of give a parent a clue that maybe this is a piece of the puzzle that we need to assess?
I always ask about headaches.
Okay.
Headaches are a big red flag. Watch and see a kid who starts off working out at a distance here and then just gets closer and closer. That's a sign of a kid that's really straining their visual system. If the kid, you can ask, do the
Hmm.
words move on the
Yeah.
page? Do you ever see two of them? So asking about those things is helpful. Also, anytime I see a kid who doesn't like to read or a kid
Hmm.
who avoids doing schoolwork, that's to me a huge red flag. And
Hmm.
if you have a kid who, they're so intelligent, if they hear something, they remember it well, but they can't remember anything they read. That's another red flag. If
That's another.
their reading and written potential isn't matching what you see as their true academic potential, that's a red flag as well.
Okay. And you mentioned sports and throwing balls and coordination and that type of thing. Do you often see this carry over to other parts of the body?
Most of the time, yes. I have some kids who are incredible, incredible athletes. I mean, really
Hmm.
gifted athletically, but they don't like to read and they struggle. And so they have visual problems, but they obviously have incredible talent and they manage to compensate and hide it. So it looks like visually they're doing okay. But typically, most of the time, the kid who struggles visually academically is the kid who's clumsy, who can't catch, who
Hmm.
can't throw, who hasn't learned to ride a bike, who keeps bumping into doors and you hear the ow because they're constantly bumping into things and they'll reach for a glass and they'll knock it over. So when I hear that, that also makes me think that there's something visual going on. the,
Okay.
the other thing is a kid who, as they're walking, if they keep their hand on the wall as they walk, that tells me they're not trusting the visual input they're getting and they're reinforcing with tactile.
What about toe walking?
Toe walking, my own child was a toe walker, and for years we tried to figure out what was going on, which got me to where I am, trying to figure out my kids and what they needed. Slow walking, we found that prism can actually, and prism basically shifting the world can get
Yeah.
them to walk appropriately. So it's interesting. You could take
Huh.
and change the visual stimulus and
Yeah.
change the tone looking from that.
So fascinating, and
Oh, it
why
is. It
we
absolutely
for
is.
sure needs people who are so intelligent in these specific areas, because there can be so many different ways that this impacts your, your function and what you're able to do during the day. And a very necessary reason to at least check out this visual system. One of the other things that you said, with the athletes, it just also made my, I love sensory stuff, and it made me go like, ooh, that's probably because if you are relying so much on the other parts of your body or the other sensory system, so your proprioceptive system, right? So where your body is in space, or where your body is in relationship to itself, if you've relied on that for so long, you can be a fantastic athlete,
Mhm.
especially with great body awareness, or even the movement, like deep pressure all the time, seeking all of that out. The climbers, the movers that way, that can really make a difference as far as athletic ability. Then you add in that visual system and you can get some buy-in, right? That's
Oh, absolutely.
literally what
And
works.
and what you do, that is the primary foundation, because if you don't have the proprioceptive feedback to
Mhm.
know where you are, you're not going to know where that is and be able to interact with anything in the world. You need to know where you are before the visual system can do its job.
Mhm. So much sense. That buy-in to, or the underlying why. So are there suggestions or books we have, or whatever resources that can help families to kind of talk through with their kids of why? And I'll tell you, my main reason I'm asking this is, like, when we started this with my son, and I was like, read those letters up on the wall, and then read them on this piece of paper, and read them on the wall. And he's like, I am not doing that. But when we started talking about he wanted to be a hockey player, and we were doing this all about at the same time, and I was like, you got to track that puck from being out there on the ice to being right in front of you on the ice. Then he's like, cool, I'm in. But like, what are some of those? I mean, obviously it was my own kid, so I could figure that out, like what would motivate him. But are there other resources that you have that can help families when they're talking through this with their kids?
One of the really great websites for parents would be the covd.org, which is College of Optometrists and Visual Development. They have wonderful resources for parents, and there's a lot of look at these symptoms. A lot of times when you read the symptoms, you'll recognize your child looking,
Mhm.
just going through those. A lot of parents will say, I read through them, and it's like, that's my kid, that's my kid, that's my kid. So that is a fantastic resource. That's probably the best one. Parents have wonderful insight on their kids
Mhm.
also. So if you're looking like my kid's just clumsy and I don't know why, parents have wonderful intuition.
Mhm.
If you think
Mhm.
there's something wrong, it's worth getting checked out. And I've had a lot of parents who came in and they said, I went to all these people and everyone said it's fine. I'm just too worried. They'll grow out of it. It's not a problem. And there was a problem. Their kid wasn't going to grow out of it. So really, parents' observation is
We
huge.
trust you. We trust you for sure. The
Yeah.
expertise. All right. I'm going to put you on the spot again one more time. So, there are a lot of families that also come to me whose children have dyslexia. And I ask the same thing about vision. Has that been checked or whatever? And they say, well, I've heard it's not an actual vision thing and that's not going to work. So, how do we know, number one, if dyslexia has something to do with the visual system, and are they related?
So I don't, disclaimer, I do not treat dyslexia. I do not claim to treat dyslexia. But what I found in my experience is a lot of kids with dyslexia have a hard time with left and right. We work a lot of body awareness and getting them to, instead of, which is your left? Oh yeah, this one. Instead of doing that is which is your left, boom, and be able
Uh-huh.
to respond quickly and feel which is left and right. Because if you have a hard time with left and right, you're going to be
Mhm.
reversing a lot of things. If you have a hard time with eye movements, and we have a readalizer, which is basically you put on a pair of goggles, read a paragraph, and the machine tracks how your eyes are moving. And if
Fascinating.
you're jumping, instead of going across nice and smooth, but the kid's going all over the place, they're going to be looking at the end of the word before they look at the beginning of the word. And they're going to say it how they see it. So
Right.
if eye movements are good, if
Mhm.
convergence are good, and if they know their left and right, then I know I've taken care of everything I can to make sure that it truly is dyslexia and not any other problem that could be affecting it and making it worse.
Love it. So what you're saying is, yes, it could be two very different things. And
Mhm.
vision therapy, if it is not going to, make a difference with true dyslexia, but that we want to make sure that we've got that underlying why.
And you
Love
can
it.
also have dyslexia and have oculomotor problems. So you
Mm-hmm.
can have the conjunction, so take care of the ocular motor, and then you'll get a better idea of how much the dyslexia is really affecting the performance.
Fantastic. I think that answers so many questions and can help families to really realize, okay, where can I start and what can I do? So, where, granted, we are in Pennsylvania here, but if someone is looking for a ophthalmologist or an optometrist, specifically, I mean, you're a developmental optometrist, you said, like, where would they start to find a person to help them?
The covd.org, College of Optometrists and Visual Development, is a great site. The other one that's really good is OEPF, Optometric Extension Program Foundation. And
Okay.
both of them have you put in where you are, and they can give you a link to different optometrists in your area.
Okay. And I will link both of those in the show notes as well. And where can they find you if, our listeners do happen to live here in the lovely Phoenixville, Pennsylvania?
We are located in the heart of Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, literally around the corner from the bustling downtown area at 227 Church Street. So if they look us up, myvisualedge.com, they can find us online and give us a call, send us an email.
Okay.
One more thing I did want to mention, not just for little kids, but for those parents who might have older kids,
Mhm.
we've had a lot of kids who really are anxious with driving, have a lot of anxiety in crowds. So I wanted to point out also a lot of the older teens who struggle with driving, they have difficulty judging distances, they're constantly rear-ending people, they have a hard time parallel parking, they're anxious driving, especially when traffic is heavy.
Mm.
That we found that they tend to have a lot of difficulty with depth perception, a lot of difficulty with the Virgin system. If we
Yeah.
improve that, we can make them drive more safely, more comfortably. And a lot of these kids have had a lot of anxiety, even related to crowds when they go to college, and there's a lot of
Mm.
hustle and a lot of crowds. And taking care of the visual system has really made them significantly more comfortable in those situations. So, not just for young kids, but even older kids, that
Yeah.
makes a difference as well.
Oh, that is fascinating. I hadn't even really thought about the driving relationship. I mean, I know visually wise the driving relationship, but thinking about the symptoms and why someone might seek out, maybe they've been reading fine for this long or they haven't and they haven't had the words to say it. And then that's another functional way that the
Mhm.
symptoms are going to show up is in
And
driving.
kids can compensate. Kids have wonderful ways to compensate, but once the task gets more difficult, the compensation breaks down and then
Yeah.
performance goes down as well.
Right. Oh, thank you so much for all of your amazing insight and intelligence. And I can't wait
Oh,
to come back
thank
and
you.
hang out with you again.
Oh, my pleasure. Always a pleasure to chat with you.